Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler, and our special guest, Michael DeVito. And today we are talking about
professional sports, fandom, and a rational life. So we're going to be tackling the question about whether being a fan can or can't be part of a life oriented by rationality. So we're going to go into a lot more depth about this, but first we want to introduce our special guest for this episode, Michael DeVito, actually our first guest on the Wisdom for Life show, so we're really honored to have you here. Mike played defensive end, first at the University of Maine and then for the New York Jets for a number of seasons, then finished out his career in the NFL with the Kansas City Chiefs. While he was at the University of Maine, Mike majored in accounting, and then after he retired from football, he went on to earn an MA and MSc, and he's currently a PhD student in philosophy of all fields at the University of Birmingham, working on, among other things, issues of free will and determinism and how epistemology and paradox bear upon these. So we've got somebody who's really like a triple threat when we want to discuss these issues that we're going to be getting into about fandom, because Mike not only has been on both sides of the fan-player fence, we could call it, but also is somebody who is well-versed in philosophy. So we're really happy to have you here on the show, and we're looking forward to a conversation, despite the fact that we, are rooting for different teams, right? You mentioned that you played against our Packers a number of times.
Yes. Well, Greg, Dan, thank you guys so much for having me on the show. It's really an honor to be here, and I'll start real quick with a story. So, playing in the NFL, you don't normally feel like a fan, right? You're around guys, and you're around these guys who are, big time, almost celebrity status figures, and you don't you're around them every day. But there are some guys who transcend that, and one of those guys was Brett Favre. I remember in 2008, Brett Favre signed with the Jets when I was with the Jets. And I remember the first time he walked in the locker room and all the guys were just like, wow. Like everybody's jaw just dropped. Like, wow, that's Brett Favre. Normally with other players, you don't care. That's how I felt the first time I met Greg Sadler. Because I have been watching you on YouTube and I've started my master's degrees in philosophy in 2016. And any time I had an issue, or I needed an extra lecture, or to get caught up on Kant or Augustine or whoever, it was right to Greg Sadler's podcast. And so it really is an honor to be here. And I remember the first time we met on Zoom, I was like that same feeling that when Brett Favre, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe Greg Sadler is on the other side of the video right now. So seriously, no, I really mean that, and it really is an honor to be here. So thank you guys.
Well, we're really happy to have you here as well, and we were hoping we can tap your brain in a number of different ways to get a lot of insights about how players view fans too. Because you and I were talking about this at another time, and this might be a good place to bring up some other anecdotes. I remember you mentioning that as a Jets player, in certain places that you would go, the fans, not even in the stadium, but in the places that you were staying, the hotels and stuff, would make it hard for opposing teams. So, and you said that the Patriots were particularly bad that way, but I imagine it's not just there, right?
Well, you'd be surprised, Greg, because it really is notorious in New England, and especially when you're playing for the Jets, right? Because you got the Patriots and Jets. This is like one of the biggest rivalries in football, and so yeah, we would have to be strategic whenever we were playing New England about where we were staying, because if you stayed, especially if you stayed in the Boston, New England area, the fans or the Patriots themselves, I don't put it past the Patriots to find us, but somebody would find us. And like clockwork, something would happen, right? It would be, the food that was catered for that week didn't show up, or this happened more than once. The fire alarm would go off at 2:00 in the morning, and all the night before the game, and all the guys would have to go outside and wake us up. And so, New England was one of those places that you just knew. And so what we ended up doing was staying all the way out in Rhode Island, about 45, 50 minutes away from the stadium.
Yeah.
And so now you had to get up early to travel out there. But the Patriots are going to find any way to beat you. And even on Saturday when you get to the hotel, they're going to try to mess you up. And so it was notoriously bad in New England.
So that's it. That's
sounds like a war of attrition.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of interesting because it goes beyond just the stadium and the places just outside of the stadium where you expect a lot of back and forth sort of stuff between fans of rival teams and, giving the other team a hard time. And that covers like a whole geographical area, where it's permeated by what would you call it? Like a certain sort of fandom that we might view as definitely irrational and maybe bad for the game in some ways.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Dan. Go ahead.
It makes me think of like, okay, so fan is derived from the word fanatic. And so like on the worst case, and maybe it will take the Patriots fan here, or like maybe some of the really negative things that you see from some of the Philadelphia Eagles fans. Put these at one end of the spectrum of like, okay, you're taking this too far, I guess. You're taking this outside of the context that you really need to for this particular thing. And we're talking about how this modern usage of this fandom needs to is this like wide spectrum. And I guess right here in the central question is, where should we actually put ourselves on this spectrum for a something that you consider a sports team, and how much is that going to subsume your life?
Right. And I think it's a great question to ask. And it's something that since I've retired, I've pondered more because I imagine the more I become a fan, the more I get addicted to the game. And when you're watching your former team or your former buddies or guys that you really care about, coaches you care about, it adds another element of maybe addictiveness, and I've had a really tough time since I've retired watching football. But going back to when I was playing, and maybe something that will make this point more salient, there were a few places, Oakland, you said Philly, New England, where if my family was going to the game, I would tell them, listen, you don't wear our jerseys, don't let them know, because you knew that they could, they could have the threat of physical violence, not just heckling, but like physical violence. And that always made me so nervous. And but I never took the step back to think, wow, that really is a silly thing. That this is such, like you said, Greg, permeated the culture, permeated that area, that it becomes like a gang, right? Being a fan of a team is like being in that gang.
Yeah, I think.
And if you're with I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and if you're from the rival, you're from the rival area, that's war. It's what you're entering into a war zone almost. And so, not to over dramatize it, but I mean, it is something as a player you have to worry about.
That's something that, I mean, we've been noting this sort of thing in Western culture for over 2,000 years. Marcus Aurelius, in the Meditations, he begins with this whole chapter about thanks about this and thanks about this. And one is that I think it's from his teacher Fronto. Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong. He learned not to be a supporter of the Blues or the Greens. These are the chariot racing teams, and people would go nuts. Like they would, not only did you have the thing of like, if your team wins, you go crazy. If your team loses, you go crazy. Even when the chariots were like just running down the track, fans would be punching each other and going after each other. And so when we think about is it okay to be a fan, these really negative things come up, and they have throughout the centuries. I mean, it's not necessarily just about sports. You can think about medieval villages where every once in a while people would just get a whole bunch of clubs and go over to the next village over and start raising trouble with them.
Yeah.
Those guys would come out. There's something endemic and irrational to group activity, especially when it involves, let's call it muscular activity, right? And young men too. Although there's plenty of women that can certainly give them a run for their money. And so I think one of the issues that we have to grapple with, and we're going to do that here, is how do we avoid that stuff or deal with that stuff when it happens and be rational, but also, enjoy ourselves as sports fans. And maybe some people would say, well, you can't do that. You got to give up sports altogether because it's always going to be fundamentally irrational. All three of us clearly are people who have not made that choice. Precisely why we're talking about this.
Well, it's interesting, Greg, because since I retired, this is the first year that I've been able to return to the game and watch it. But I actually did have to say, okay, unless I have something I have to commentate on, like you have a number of interviews that people would ask me to do or talk about the game or something like that, I would watch a game for those reasons if I had an interview commitment. But outside of that, I had to step away from it. My first year out of the NFL, so just a little backstory, 2015 was my last season. And during that year, I had sustained 2 concussions during the season. And they were back-to-back. And it was right at the time where the movie Concussion had come out, and all of this new data had come out about brain trauma in the NFL and CTE and all of that. And so I got done with that season, and I'm contemplating retirement with my wife, and she had been pretty quiet about it. And about March, when free agency is about to start, the Chiefs call and say, hey, we want you to come back. We're going to put a contract on the table. We want you to come back. And, this is 2 months since I'd played, so I'd forgotten about all the concussions and injuries and how tough the season was before. And I said, oh, yeah, well, okay, fine. This is what I do. I play football. And I brought it to my wife, and she basically said, if you go, you're going by yourself because I'm not going. I can't watch you, knocked out on the field anymore. I'm done. We have another kid on the way. My youngest son was born in November of that year, and so we knew he was coming. And so now I'm watching the Chiefs that season, and I know I could be out there with them, and I'm watching them play, and it just was a hell. Like I was just such an awful person to be around.
While you were watching
while I was watching it, and like when the Chiefs did good, I would be crazy because I wish I was there with them.
Yeah.
And when they did bad, it was like I need to be experiencing that suffering with them. And it just made me an awful husband, an awful father. You just didn't want to be anywhere near me. And then to make matters worse, a bunch of the guys on the defensive line, the position I played, got hurt. And so in November, the Chiefs called my agent and said, is he ready? Because we need somebody. Like, has he been training? Has Mike been training? Because we want him to come back for the rest of the season. And so I was like, 7 games, I missed training camp, I missed all TAs, I missed all the crap that as a veteran you don't want to do. And my wife is still like, again, if you go, you're going on your own. And so obviously I'm not going to leave her, my newborn. And so now I'm watching them struggle, the Chiefs struggle with a defensive line that's all beat up, and I'm the guy, they need me there. And it just, my entire life was consumed with this hell. And there was nothing I can do to kick it. So after the 2016 season, I said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. It's totally all consuming. I mean, I had no idea until recently I had to actually be a fan and watch the game in, like you said, in a rational sort of way.
What's the difference then between being a fan in a rational way and being one of these crazy fans? Because I mean, what you're describing is something different, right? It's I'm belong to this organization, but some of the crazy fans almost seem to think that they are parts of the organization as well. So go ahead, Dan.
I had a thought about this because it seems like we have two organizations that are kind of symbiotic here. We have the actual football team and the business and the organization that there is, and maybe you want to even like make this into a tri symbiotic thing.
Okay.
In that we have maybe three organizations. You have the core team, you have the organization that is the money making, the ownership, and then you have this third group. This is the fans that are like they feed off of all of the pageantry and all of the storylines that are going on with this, and they feel like they are part of it, but they are actually not. It's kind of like people who create these relationships with people that are like YouTube celebrities, even though they have no, or just any celebrity whatsoever. They feel like this deep connection to them, even though it's really kind of like this one way, this vicarious living this life.
That I think is characteristic of fandom in general. I mean, you look at all the different cons that exist precisely so that people can go and think about Star Trek, for example, right? So some of those original cast members are still out there going to cons and like meeting people. How many people have they met? Like, it's got to be, some of them, hundreds of thousands at this point. There's no way you can have a personal connection with all of these. And then, we've got all the newer ones, and people really do get kind of obsessive with it, and well, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Greg. I was just going to say, on the flip side, it's funny how fast things change. So I remember in the article you wrote, Greg, you talked about how you took us through the history of the Packers, right? And how growing up they stunk.
Which has not always been illustrious.
Yeah, right. But then you get to the Aaron Rodgers era, and now they're, getting the Super Bowl, the Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers era, and they're doing well. But then in 2017, you talk about how Rodgers gets hurt, and now all of a sudden, the expectation had been set so high that everybody's turning on the team, and hey, this can't happen. Like, we deserve that. Everybody forgot about. Yeah. And so it's interesting because I was thinking about that, and the Chiefs just experienced that. So when I went to Kansas City in 2013, the year before, they had finished the season 2-14.
Yeah, I remember.
So Andy Reid comes in 2013, and we win 9 games in a row, right? We finish the season 11-5, get back to the playoffs, and it's basically been like that every year for Kansas City since Andy Reid got out there. Now they lose. Now take it all. Last year they win the Super Bowl, right? Take it all the way now to Week 5 this year. And they just lost last week to the Raiders. And you can go on Twitter and on social media and see Chiefs fans calling for defensive players and guys who messed up in the game to
get fired,
be gone. Yeah. There's a kid. There's a player on the Chiefs who basically single-handedly got them to the playoffs. And not Patrick Mahomes on defense. He was able to make a couple key stops that turned the momentum in these games. And he's really one of the primary reasons outside of Mahomes that they got to the Super Bowl and won the Super Bowl. And he didn't have a good game against the Raiders in Week 5 last week, and they're calling for him to get released. So it's even fast how crazy it is that they love you and then they'll turn on you in a second. And it's almost like an idol, a failed idol, where your God doesn't show up.
And I think that what's going on there is, so everybody's driven by motives, right? And when you think about what motives go into being a good fan, it's like caring about the organization, wanting nobody to get hurt, everybody to play at their best. These sorts of things that we can put into, let's call it an ethos of good sportsmanship and play. But I think there's a lot of people out there that really value success, not just for themselves, because very often they're not experiencing success, but success of whatever it is that they're involved with. And it could be a sports team. I think for a lot of people it is a sports team. It could also be like the success of their local Rotary organization. It could be their corporation or something like that. And they're so invested in success as the really good thing that anybody who can't, for even just temporarily, as you're pointing out, measure up to that, get rid of them, And that's sort of a recipe for making yourself unhappy, and also not having a good relationship with whatever object it is that you're supposed to be, showing affection or loyalty to, And so going back to the Packers thing, and actually, I mean, we should talk about some really, really diehard fans. I mean, it's one thing to be a Packers fan and grow up in the 70s and 80s when the team just had losing season after losing season, and everybody was, saying, "Oh, this is the year they're going to come back," and we'd get all excited, and then we'd see these terrible games. And even in the Brett Favre era, there were a lot of games where it was almost like the Packers' MO: 3 really good quarters and then blow it in the fourth, and you'd be like, Packers, But think about Browns fans, I mean, the Browns are hot right now, fortunately, for like the first time in 4 decades, I think.
Yeah.
And I know people who are
the
Browns
Lions
fans. Well, the Lions too. Yeah,
Greg, I just talked to my friend Joe Thomas today, who was their Hall of Fame left tackle that was there for so long, we asked him. One of my buddies asked him, do you ever wish the team was winning like this when you were there? And he said, I was like, I think he said I was 1-31 his last 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
1-31 his last 2 years in the NFL.
I
was like,
man,
I could not imagine that. You guys, that is absolute hell going into an organization that's lost that much. I mean, it's just the black cloud that must have been over that place. And
the fans that are showing up, they must really be committed, because they can't get bragging rights or anything like that,
That's right.
So they must get something else out of it, and we see communities do a lot of things, and as like social creatures, this embrace of a community allows us to kind of get away from our individuality and let us subsume ourselves within this community, and doing this allows us to have some sort of common purpose, and it allows us to kind of transcend self-interest in exchange for group interest. And like you were talking about, Mike, about like, you forget about all the pain and how hard it is, you're 2 months out of it, all you are thinking about is that feeling of community and working together with your brothers down in the trenches, just being part of that group, and we derive so much, like, I guess, pleasure and for a lot of people, like a source of meaning, that you can't, and if you want to extend it to the Browns, like, even though that they were losing, there's still, if you're in the locker room and you're working with these guys every day, you have a commitment to these people, and you as long as the locker room is not toxic, then you're gonna do everything you can to help out your brothers there. And I think that also extends a little bit to these fandoms that are around these people, because they create a community, and it's not that they have to win or lose, it's the community that they're actually valuing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that was the biggest difference between my time with the Jets and my time in Kansas City. With the Jets, you're in New York, you're in the city, you're still a small fish, right? There's a million other things for people to do out there. You got Brad Pitt walking down the street. So people don't care too much. They care about their team, but it's not Kansas City. It was a community. It felt like college again, where it was like the whole community was really that 12th man, right? So I would go out to the plaza or go out to the mall, and it was like, hey, there's DeVito, like, man, like, but it wasn't like a fan thing. It was like a brother thing, a brother sister. Like, it was like, this is our family, and they really embodied that more, what you're saying, Dan, than New York did. So but no, that's right. It's exactly right. It's true.
That's interesting. Green Bay, because they're based up in Green Bay, sometimes there's a feeling like that. They do a lot of community things. But I remember my sister was up in the Fox Cities, and she was working as a bartender in this pool hall, and a lot of the Packers players used to come in there. But this is much earlier. This is in the 90s. And this is, the team now is pretty squeaky clean. Back then wasn't quite the case, and the Packers would come in and like some of the other people like leave by the other door because they're like, these guys are going to be trouble, sort of like the Raiders have been at other times, and right. I think that like that ethos component is really important too. People value their team for different reasons. I mean, like the Eagles, clearly winning and aggression is all I'm going to generalize here. I'm going to say that's all they really care about, right? I would say something kind of similar holds for the Pats fans. But I think with other organizations, there's values that come to permeate the organization, and they can be there or not be there. I'm also going to go out on sort of a controversial limb here, although I don't think it's that controversial in Milwaukee, and say that getting rid of McCarthy was really instrumental in making the Packers a functioning organization again, because he'd been kind of like a lead weight just sitting on the team for quite a while. He was quite good at the start, but somehow something didn't work, and the team got more and more out of sync. Now watching them when they're playing, they're actually really enjoying themselves. And we use the word camaraderie and family and ethos. I think that when you have an organization that has those sorts of characteristics, even if they're not necessarily winning games, the fans can sense something. And I don't know how to express this that well. What is this something that they're maybe you have a better way of expressing it. Or Dan, maybe you have some.
It's hard to put your finger on, right? But so maybe this will help flesh it out a little bit. But so I've lived in New England basically my whole life, right? So I played in New York, played in Kansas City, but grew up in New England and live in Maine. My wife's from Maine. And so I come back here every offseason. And obviously last year, Kansas City wins the Super Bowl. And now New England's used to winning the Super Bowl every other year. So everybody up here is, they're so spoiled up here. Yeah. But it was so funny, the reaction I got from Patriots fans up here. It was almost like, they were like, Mike, you won. You did it. Like, you did it. I was like, I've been retired. Like, I retired 4 years ago. Like, I've been here with you the whole time. Yeah. Like, what do you mean? They're like, no, you did it, man. Kansas City did it. You won. Like, you got to, like, I did more interviews last year during the playoffs.
Interesting.
When Kansas City, they were in my house. I'm signing autographs. I'm doing local media thing. I'm like, guys, but I kept reminding them, like, you guys know, like, I've been here with you.
Yeah,
I'm not on the team. But you could just see with them, like you're saying, that ethos, that family, like, even when it came to, me being a Chiefs player, they just assumed that, no, yeah, you're them. That's you. Like, you're an extension of them. And so I don't know if that helped flesh it out, but it just it just kind of speaks to what you're saying. Like, oh yeah, no, I couldn't wrap my head around it,
Yeah, you're part of the team, even though it's endearing. It's you spend enough time that you're a Chiefs player for life. You're just part of the family.
That's right. Yeah. And now the flip side of that. Now, playing 6 years for the Jets and coming home to New England.
Yeah,
I remember people didn't want anything to do with me.
Wow.
They were so happy that I went to Kansas City. When I was playing for the Jets, I remember my dad went to a game in New England. We were playing in New England. My dad went to one of the games, and he was with a bunch of his friends, and they had a house that they owned near the stadium, so he was over there. And he said, I got to use the bathroom. Can I use the bathroom? And they said, no.
Oh.
And he's like, wait, what? He said, no, your son plays for the Jets, so you can't come in my house. I was like, this is his friends. And they wouldn't even let him in the house. And they really wouldn't. It wasn't like a joke. Like, they wouldn't let him in the house to use the bathroom.
I wonder what they thought they were accomplishing by taking that stand,
I don't know.
Is it not that, or maybe it's just an idea of disgust that they have such negative feelings towards the Jets that anything that is associated with the Jets is seen as disgusting,
contaminated by.
It did feel that way.
Wow.
Yeah, it did feel like that, Dan, which is totally crazy to think about.
Yeah, it's highly irrational, and this is again that side of fandom that we don't want to slip into those sorts of things, right?
Right.
So maybe
Right.
we should talk about some of the bad things that fans have done and see like where they're failing here.
Okay.
So we've got I guess terms of like motivations and values and how can we have like good or bad motivations. In this case, talking about Mike's dad here and their motivations. Like, are they actually trying to hurt you, or are they valuing something so highly, like the Pats, that anything that would be even I guess the Pats are so sacred in the sense that anything that would potentially harm that sacredness needs to be kept out at all costs.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah, it's I mean, it demands the sacrifice of other values. Like, for example, I mean, later on we're going to hopefully talk about virtues associated with good fandom. And I think one of those is hospitality, something that was it was recognized as a value in ancient Greece. It also played a role in monastic culture and down through the ages. But that's almost like the opposite of hospitality. It sees the other person as not guest, but enemy,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, if you want to throw off an opposing team, when you show hospitality, it's like we don't know how to react. I remember I was playing at Maine and we went to play Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And so Nebraska's not afraid of Maine coming, 1AA Maine coming to play Nebraska at their house, to open up the season. We're the team they're going to beat up on to get going. And so the fans, it wasn't, I don't know how they are during regular games, but like we're walking out and they're like, "Hey guys, good to see you. Like, I'm glad you guys made it out this way," And they're like, and we were like, "Wait, what? Like, why are you being nice to us?" They're totally nice. And we were shook. We had no idea how to react. It's like, it's almost, you could play reverse psychology on them. It's only get in their mind more because guys are so used to getting cussed out. And
although this is kind of like one of the bases of like a lot of Christian thought of like turning the other cheek, that it's also like found in game theory, talking about how can you get the best out of people, and if you're constantly like someone makes a move against you, then you want to move against them in response, and this just goes tit for tat. But tit for tat, once one person makes a bad move, then everyone's stuck in this bad moves back and forth. And so what actually works best in these cases is a tit for tat, but every once in a while you are benevolent and you say, even though that you did something negative towards me, I'm going to do something positive. And that's the one thing that gets you out of these negative tit for tat, like just back and forth.
Such an interesting. I never thought of it like that, but you're right. It just keeps escalating when it's the tit for tat. But you take, I laugh about this because I've used this piece of advice. My wife likes to watch like the Bravo housewife shows, where it's just drama from beginning to end. And I'm always saying, if one person just said, "Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I did that. Like I shouldn't have done that." Mm-hmm. They wouldn't have a show because they would just everything would just dissolve, right? But you just got this tit for tat for tit for tat. So I never thought of it in the context of fans and sports, but it's an interesting point. I think it could be a good strategic move for an opposing fan base to use. I think it would totally throw me off.
Yeah.
That's interesting because it implies that, so like
Greg,
the Packers, I'm going to use them as an example again, because I got to go to Lambeau for the very first time last November for a division rival game against the Bears, and the Packers. Packers and Bears are traditional, long-standing rivalry. I'm actually a fan of both, and I get a lot of grief from people on both sides of the fence about that. But when you actually are at Lambeau, even when it's the Bears who are playing, and they also will, like play the Bears still suck, there's a good-heartedness about things. You have Packers and Bears fans in regalia sitting next to each other, talking to each other, finding out where you go for a hot dog or things like. People pass the hot dog, they don't throw your hot dog away because you're a Bears fan or something like that. I don't know what it's like for the teams exactly, but it's the fan experience is one of hospitality. So I think that could come to be expected then, right? We'll go to Lambeau and everyone will treat us nice. Then there wouldn't be any strategic advantage to it then.
Yeah, that's right.
It's interesting to see, like, certain cultures that have grown up in really harsh conditions tend to create a culture of really openness and hospitality. You look in the places in the Middle East have a long tradition of being very open and saying, like, okay, someone comes, you open the door and you allow them in. And this also happens in like, I grew up in Montana, and so there's this certain amount of a tradition of this because it's a harsh environment. And I wonder if just because Lambeau's way up north and it's cold and you need to work together a little bit. There's if you live in a too nice of an environment, then it's easier for you to be more independent. Whereas if you live in a harsh environment, you have to depend on other people in order to survive. Maybe not nowadays, but at least those are cultures that spring up in there.
Yeah. You know what, though? Some of the best fans are Chargers fans. So they were out in San Diego. They were like the nicest people in the world. So I don't know if that would be a counter example, but it was like San Diego was one of the one places where I was like, oh, you guys can wear your jerseys and do whatever. San Diego people were like, just hug it out,
That's actually a good segue into something I was wanting to ask you about, which is from a player's perspective, you encounter a lot of fans. What makes a fan a good fan? Like the kind of person who's not a pain in the rear, who you've got to deal with, somebody who you actually look forward to engaging with. What makes I'm willing to bet it's not like they bow down and they're like, oh, I'm not worthy, that sort of stuff. Yeah. That must get very old very quickly. Right. What makes for good fans?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I agree with you. You don't want, or at least I didn't want the fan that was just going to prop you up and as some idol. But I really, like I said, going back to Kansas City, I really enjoyed the fans out there because it really was a family atmosphere. Everywhere we went was a family atmosphere, and the fans would embrace you as part of the family. I mean, I remember some of my first weeks over there, just how excited the fans were to see me, and it was like, wow, how do the fans even know me? I'm this kind of obscure player who's only been out here for a couple weeks, and they already know who I am. But it is just a sort of respect, like, hey, and we're in this together, and they'll still hold you accountable, right? So like I always appreciated fans who would say the truth and be like, hey, DeVito's got to do better. He's got to step it up, but not over the top. You have one bad game and they're calling for your head, yeah. And so so it's in the middle of the bow down to you or worship you versus the you had one slip up, so you pack your bags and go home. I mean, Kansas City has fantastic fans. I think they do a great job. I would imagine it'd be similar to the fans in Green Bay. You have very similar climates.
Yeah, I mean, you do get some people who are like on the boards or things like that, where they can check in. They're like, this person needs to go, that person needs to go. So I think you're always going to have some of those fans, but in general, it seems to be more like even if they're losing, it's like, well, you got to back the pack and go do a good job, guys. Sort of attitude. Yeah. And it's rarely. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, the pack your bags thing drives me nuts because from fans, because we don't do this. Like, you don't go to the guy from State Farm and say, you had a bad dad today. They need to fire you and send you home, so you can't provide for your family. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I wish, if there was one thing I could say, I wish fans would recognize this. Like, when you're calling for somebody to get fired, you're calling for them, for their job to be in jeopardy, for them to lose their job and might not get. I mean, the NFL is not a forgiving place. I mean, you lose your job more than one or two times and you're not back in. And so I would have, I would have even friends up here in New England who say, hey, we hope you don't play well this year because we don't want you guys to beat New England. So like they would say, we hope you do poorly at your job. So, you know what I mean? So it's like, you guys you don't do that to the guy working at Shaw's at the supermarket or at Dunkin' Donuts. Like I understand it's different. It is a game, so it's not totally comparable. But like I wish fans would have more sympathy for the fact that when you're calling for somebody's head, you want them to literally lose their ability to provide for themselves and their family. And it's stressful. It's incredibly stressful when you're playing for a losing team. As a player, if you're not having a good season and wow, my salary could be on the line. Do I have enough to make it? If I get cut, I can't get back into the NFL. Will I get another chance? I mean, the stress that players and coaches go through when guys aren't playing well or things aren't going well is incredible. So if there was one thing that, going back to the question asked before, what makes a good fan, that would be one important point. Like, just recognize when you're calling for somebody to get fired, it's a real job that you're calling for somebody to get fired to.
Yeah.
Get fired from,
There's too much separation from the fact that you're actually talking about human beings, and they have emotions, and they can be hurt by people. Just because you don't get to know them on a personal level doesn't mean that they're not actually humans.
That's right. That's a really interesting point. It's sort of like treating them as if they're like characters, NPCs essentially, in a video game. Or like you're watching some drama on TV. Like I used to, when I was younger, I used to actually talk to the TV every once in a while, and say that's a stupid. I didn't say obviously this sort of thing. I said in other words, but that's a stupid decision. That person ought to be cut from whatever is going on in some adventure thing, right? How could you be so dumb? No, that's totally irrational. Because obviously those people aren't hearing you. You're talking to yourself to a screen, right? Yeah. And people are forgetting that when they're dealing with actual teams, because those are actual people.
Yeah. And then it's much worse for football. Like, it is a general thing to see people yell at the players at the screen. It's like, they can't hear you. Well, like, you are just yelling into the ether here. It is producing nothing, and it's just getting you riled up.
Players, coaches, and refs, right?
Yeah. And it's funny, Greg. Until I read, this is the truth. Until I read your article a couple of weeks ago, because I was just as guilty of that, and I had never even reflected on it. I've reflected on fandom from an aspect of time, or like is it a time well spent to really sit on my couch and watch TV for 4 hours? Like, is that really being productive? Is that really making the best use of my time? But I had never thought of the irrationality of with the Chiefs 2 years ago were in the AFC Championship game, one game away from going to the Super Bowl, and they lost to the Patriots. And I was sweating this whole game, and I'm yelling at the TV, and I'm yelling at the guys, and I'm yelling at Brady, and I'm doing. You brought this up in your article about how people will do these weird superstitious things where they'll sit down and I'm doing that. I was sitting on the table before, and we scored. Like, I'm going right back over there. It's so funny because very rarely does anybody step out and say, this is nuts. Like, if you came from an alien race and came down and looked at humanity, you would say intelligent life hasn't made it, hasn't evolved yet on this planet, because look at these people.
At least during games, right?
It's during games. Yeah, that's right.
So I wanted to bring up, because this is kind of very similar how Emil Durkheim kind of describes religions as, groups that are a unified system of beliefs and practices that unite members into a single moral community. And so you can see there's a parallel between a lot of these practices, these superstitions, and what is really powerful about these particular types of organization is it has three things that interact with each other: believing, doing, and belonging. And by doing, you are perpetuating your own belief in the thing, and doing these things then produces other people to say, oh, this person is part of the group, and that makes you be more welcome to be part of the group, and lets you belong, and it binds people together, but it also blinds us, and we turn things into sacred objects. And so for football, we can say, Tom Brady is the GOAT. If you're a Pats fan, Tom Brady's the GOAT. You can't say anything. Nothing will ever say is like, 6 rings. That's all you have to say. 6 rings, and you can just plug your ears and go la 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 to anything else. But like there are really beneficial things to these types of groups. It reduces free riders. It increases trustworthiness within that group, and it increases commitment to that group by repeatedly doing these things. But it also it's very much benefits for the in-group, and that does not mean that these things at all benefit anyone in the out-group.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really, I mean, there's a book to be written about this. I'm sure there has, but not to go off on too far of a tangent, but I think about the political climate that we're in right now, and I think about my time in Kansas City and how I could sit down in a room with an atheist and 2 Muslims and 2 liberals and a conservative, and we can have this fantastic, respectful conversation, which we did in Kansas City. We had some really good thinkers out there on the team. And yet, because we were all working for that goal and we were part of that community, and it was like, because we would go out on that field and go to battle together, you never got into, it was never anything that you hated the other guy because of their different views.
Yeah.
Because you knew there was something bigger. And it's like, man, I wish we could get to that place in politics where we recognized the fact that we're in America, that we're all on this. I mean, everybody's on the same team, but as an American society, we're all on the same, like we all want to work for the same thing. We're all trying to reach the same goal. So it's like, having this greater community in a political sense, I think would. I just know from my time in Kansas City, we were able to have the disagreements that people are having now, but it was so much less volatile and heated up. And so
I have So I look at my fandom of the Packers in at least partially a distance way, but I also use it specifically because I want to scratch that community itch, and I don't want to do that with politics, because politics is going to divide us. And if I like the Packers and I root for the Packers and I might root against the Bears or something, there's nothing that's materially being hurt by the fans or the Bears. I don't want them to get hurt on the field as well. But me rooting against the half of the country, of the other political party, just means that I want them to have a worse life, and I can't wrap my head around why I should have that be the basis of a fandom that will blind me to the benefits that we can use together.
Yeah, so you're saying you don't want to take that sports analogy and apply it to politics, because now you're going to see the other side as sort of the other team, where they're the enemy. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that people do absolutely turn fandom, the political party, into the fandom. I'm saying that I try to stymie that by using that itch to have a fandom, to be part of a group that, because we are social creatures, and I use football as that thing that scratches that itch, and and then I can just divorce myself from the fandoms that kind of arise from politics.
It's it's interesting. Gotcha. So 2 things. One, with the politics thing, if we were all one big team, wouldn't we need to be like one big team by opposition to somebody else, like China or Russia or something like that, which we did have during the Cold War, for example. But the other thing is, so, I love talking football, and I enjoy it. And I I watch to see what other teams are doing and stuff like that, so I can actually talk with people from other areas about that. But I know that, especially among academics, there's a lot of people that are not into sports at all. And as soon as you start bringing that up, they're like, I don't do sports ball, because that's their code for it. And I think that the reason why they say that is they feel excluded. They feel like they're not part of the conversation. And I can understand that, because there's plenty of fandoms that I just, don't fit into. When it comes to music, I know metal and I know a few other things here and there, but if people are talking about all sorts of other genres, I'm at sea. And no, I don't usually let it bother me, because I don't feel like they're deliberately excluding me. But I think a lot of people do feel like if we're focusing heavily on sports fandom, we're leaving them out in a way.
Yeah, so you're talking specifically about the academic. That's big in the academic world.
I would say that there's a higher concentration of them in academia, but you can find people that just aren't into that, that sort of fandom all over the place, and they may be into some sort of other fandom of their own.
The tech scene was like that a lot, especially in the Northwest, until Seattle started being good.
And then people start wearing jerseys and things. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because I get to see both worlds, and looking at my football career, I know firsthand how much work it took to get to the top, right? To be one of the best in the world. And so now making the transition to the academic world has been incredibly humbling. And like I said at the start of the show, Greg, I have been a fan of yours because I see the level that you're at, right? The level of the philosopher that you have become. And it's just like, it's like being the high school kid again and watching, the Tom Brady and those guys. And then seriously, and so I wonder if people need to recognize, especially you talking professional academics and professional tech people, it's like, you guys have made it to the top too. Like to be a professional philosopher. When I first started studying philosophy, one of my first ethics class, we read the Kant's Groundwork.
That's a tough one.
Small book. Greg, I had it memorized, and I didn't know what he was talking about. I watched your stuff on Kant. I probably spent hundreds of hours, and just for that little book.
That's partly a function of Kant, though. Kant is he's writing in his own code, right? He's sort of like doing, if you're thinking about like exercises, right? He's sort of like an obstacle course packed into one little block,
right.
Maybe in 3D too.
Right. But now, Greg, you've done, I can find any philosopher, a history of philosophy, I can go to your channel and find you giving a detailed
not yet.
Lecture.
Not yet, because there's still a lot of gaps, but there are at least some that I can do that with. But I was going to joke and say the good thing about academia and philosophy is I don't have guys trying to tackle me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I don't have to run down the field,
right.
Worrying about whether I'm going to damage a tendon or something like that.
Yeah, I did, but sometimes I'd be like, man, I would take that over trying to. I look at the Critique of Pure Reason after I got done with the groundwork, and I'm like, well, that's going to sit on the bookshelf because that would take me my whole life to get through that.
Well,
so I think I say all this to say, I wonder if people recognize that, especially in professional areas like what you're doing, Greg, you've made it to the top. Like you're a pro, and I wonder if that would help sort of bridge the gap where you're not feeling excluded. Because I have a ton of respect and I want to be a part of the academic community because I see the pros and I'm like, damn, I want to be like one of the pros.
There's a really funny story. And I think Dan is the one who reminded me of it most recently about A.J. Ayer, this British philosopher, meeting Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson was giving some girl a hard time, trying to hit on her or something like that. And A.J. Ayer was like in his 80s and he intervened at a party. And Mike Tyson was like, I'm the heavyweight champion of the world. I'll knock you out, And A.J. Ayer said, listen, we're both, highly respected professionals in our respective fields. I don't know that I'm the champion, but I'm pretty close. Why don't we go have a drink together?
Yeah.
And Tyson was like, yeah, okay. This guy is
That's fantastic. And it's so true. It's so true. It's been incredibly humbling since I retired, right? Because what I didn't originally recognize when I got done with football, well, when you make it to the top, and I was like, oh, I'll be good at anything I do, right? I'm a pro.
Interesting.
I know how to be a pro. And so I've been, I started martial arts into jiu-jitsu and stuff like that. Guys, it's been 5 years. I haven't beaten anybody. I get the crap kicked. Just crap beat out of me. You know what I mean? Philosophy. It took 2 master's degrees to get into a PhD program, and I have all the assets in the world, all the time in the world, a love for it. I can just study it constantly, and it took 2 master's degrees. It took 5 years to finally get good enough to get into a PhD program, and so it's been incredibly humbling to see. Oh,
that's a segue into something I wanted to ask you to talk about just a little bit, and we're getting close to the end, so don't go into like super detail. But why philosophy of all fields? I mean, I'm happy that you're studying it, but it's kind of a surprise. So what was the motivation?
Yeah, it's interesting, Greg. I don't know if I just got hit the right way. It started. I became a Christian in 2007. And one of the first things that really changed when I became a Christian was wanting to study and read. I don't know if I had read a book front to back prior to 2007. I mean, seriously. Okay. And so and that's talk about the college system. Like I made it through college without reading a book front to back. So maybe something needs to happen there. But I started with theology, and then one thing I couldn't stand about theology, and this is kind of, I saw the philosopher early, was everybody was so held onto their views, right? So like when I started, I didn't believe in the Trinity. I held to a oneness model of God. And I talked to my Trinity friends, and they'd be like, nope, you're going to hell. Like, it's over. Like you can't. And then I talked to my oneness buddies. I'm like, hey, the Trinity people had some good stuff. I'm like, nope, going to hell. You can't believe in the Trinity. So I was like, I'm out. I'm out. I can't do this. I want to have a discussion. So then it morphed into apologetics. But then studying more apologetics, I was like, oh, no, it's not really apologetics. Like I like apologetics because apologetics and philosophy are very similar. But like I don't really feel like sitting around and debating the fine-tuning argument for hours. You know what I mean? I was like, I want to study abstract objects, and I want to study the foreknowledge and freedom problem. And and then I found my home in 2016 after I took my first philosophy of religion course. I found my home in philosophy. I was like, I just started reading, or graduate level textbooks and Kant, and I was like, oh, I'm hooked. It was just like I'm really addicted. Like I know it's bad when I don't want to go lift weights because I want to read.
Wow.
Like that's bad.
That's a good
thank you very much for that. We got to get to our practice here.
Yeah, so if we want to be rational fans, maybe a Stoic practice could be helpful for us. We call it the reserve clause, and I think this could be helpful when you're watching a game or doing anything else. Do you want to say a little bit more about it, Dan?
So yeah, like the idea of in Christianity, the reserve clause is God willing, and so in Stoic philosophy, it's fate willing, and so like I'm going to try to do this thing, God willing or fate willing. It's like the whole idea is to remove your desire for the thing. I have an aim for a thing, and I'm going to desire what actually happens. And hooray! If the thing that I'm aiming for actually happens, that's great. If it doesn't happen, that's also great. I now have a new position of new reality, and I can work towards that goal, or you can find a new goal. But you don't desire the things that you don't have control over.
That's so. Go ahead.
And so, I guess, today we're going to leave you with the words of Vince Lombardi. The price of success is hard work, dedication to the job at hand, and determination that whenever we win or lose, we have applied the best of ourselves to the task at hand.